Hi, everyone. My name is Milo. I use he and they pronouns. I'm a white, queer, trans person and civil rights attorney barred in New York State. I'm also the CEO of Just Roots Consulting, which is bringing you this training today. And today we're going to talk about what your rights are under the New York State human rights law and how to exercise those rights either in court or by filing a complaint with the New York State Division of Human Rights. Before we begin, bear in mind that this recording is accurate as of December of 2021. Laws, regulations, rules, and practices change over time. So definitely check in with an attorney or with a legal services provider or with the New York State Division of Human Rights directly to find out if there are any updates that you should be aware of. But usually this information is pretty accurate for a while. So hopefully it'll serve as a good foundation for everybody to start from. Before we jump into New York State specific rights, I just want to give some context about how these state rights work in the grand scheme of things. So as you may or may not know, we have federal laws that create a federal floor that everybody in the United States is supposed to abide by. States are allowed to add to the federal floor, add additional protections, additional rights, additional options for you to exercise those rights. Some states have done that. They've created additional rights like New York. New York State has pretty expansive rights that protect LGBTQ folks in a lot of different aspects of life. Some states like Ohio and Texas, for example, those certainly not the only ones, have hung out at the federal floor. So people who live in those states are really reliant on what is happening with the federal law to make up their rights and their protections. As long as we live in a state like New York, we have additional rights and protections that cover us no matter what happens to the federal law. In addition, depending on where you live, you might have even more rights that are passed by your city or county in the form of ordinances. New York City is a really great example of this, but it's not the only one. If you live outside of New York City in the rest of the state, like I do, I live in Livingston County, then this training is definitely for you. Okay, so just to give you an idea of where we are in terms of federal law so that you know what your rights are on that level too. Talking about specifically employment, we're going to look at the Title VII of the 1964 Civil Rights Act, which is a federal act, a federal law that deals with sex discrimination in places of employment. If you work for a really small employer who has fewer than 15 employees, the federal law doesn't even apply to them. So you actually don't have protections under federal law if you're working with a really small employer. Now, so that you understand how it works, the EEOC or Equal Employment Opportunity Commission complaint process is fairly easy. It's free. You do not need an attorney to do it, but you must file within 180 days of the last time discrimination happened. Or if you live in a state that has similar protections, which we do in New York, you have 300 days to file a complaint. So just under a year. It's kind of a random number, so don't forget it. It's 300 days since the last time you experienced discrimination. Typically, the EEOC takes about 180 days to investigate claims that come to them. That's about 6 months. Routinely, it can take longer, so don't get excited about it being wrapped up in 6 months, but that's how long it's supposed to take. And then once they've done an investigation, they will make what's called a reasonable cause finding, which is whether or not they have reasonable cause to believe that discrimination did happen or that it didn't. If they find that they think it did happen, that there's reasonable cause to believe it did happen, what you'll get is an opportunity to mediate the situation with the EEOC to try to come up with some sort of agreement or resolution so that you can kind of wrap things up and move on with your life or continue to go to work. Or you'll be given what's called a right to sue letter, and this allows you to go to federal court. What's really important is that you cannot get to federal court without filing an EEOC complaint first. It is a gateway. So the deadlines are really, really important. In New York, the New York State human rights law particularly covers everyone in the state, including those in New York City. New York City's human rights law is a little bit more expansive, and it's something that covers folks that only live within the 5 boroughs of New York City. If you are outside of New York City, but somewhere else in New York State, like I am, this applies to you. So let's check out what New York has to offer. So the New York State human rights law protects against discrimination and harassment that's based on actual or perceived race, national origin, religion, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity and expression, and disability, among other things. So if you think you've actually experienced these and other kinds of discrimination, check out the New York State Division of Human Rights website for a full list of all the different characteristics and traits that might be protected under the law. The idea is that homophobia and transphobia do not have a place in New York State, and we are all protected based on these identities and characteristics. The New York State human rights law protects against discrimination and harassment in areas of employment. If you are employed by any sized employer, you are protected by the human rights law. So if you'll remember, under the Title VII, which is the federal law, you had to work for an employer with 15 or more employees. Here, it could be any size employer. So even if you work for a really small company with only 3 people, you are protected by the human rights law. It also protects people in housing, and this includes both private and public housing. Also, access to credit. So if you're applying for a credit card or a loan, personal loan, equity, mortgage, any of that, and you're discriminated against based on your protected identity, that is against the law, as well as places of public accommodation. So this means pretty much anywhere life happens in public. Restaurants, grocery stores, movie theaters, parks, government buildings. I mean, the actual law lists a bunch of different places like amusement parks and billiard clubs and soda jerks and ice cream parlors, right? Just like places that life happens in public. You are protected in those spaces, as well as education. The New York State Human Rights Law specifically protects LGBTQ folks. Sexual orientation was added back in 2003. In 2016, we had some regulations that covered trans and gender expansive people. And as of 2019, with the passage of GENDA, we now have explicit protections for gender identity and gender expression. What's really important is that the regulations from 2016 also cover gender dysphoria as a recognized disability. This is important if you are a trans or gender expansive or non-binary person who has gender dysphoria. If you are experiencing discrimination or harassment in the workplace, for example, and maybe people are using the wrong pronouns for you, dead naming you, not letting you use the right name on your email address or on your name tag, these can all be forms of disability discrimination because it means the employer is not providing reasonable accommodations for your disability. So bear in mind that you have that additional protection if it's something that you want to use. So here are some common examples of unlawful employment discrimination. Asking whether someone is LGBTQ during a job interview, can't do it. Refusing to hire someone because of their sexuality, gender identity, or expression, passing you up for promotion, demoting you, or otherwise holding you back from professional opportunities that are available to non-LGBTQ employees, refusing access to restrooms or other single-sex facilities that would be appropriate to your gender identity, refusing or consistently failing to use your preferred name or correct pronouns or title, failing to address sexual harassment, jokes, pranks, invasive or personal questions, touching, hostility, or other actions by colleagues or supervisors that contribute to a disrespectful or hostile work environment. Also threatening to fire, demote, or otherwise retaliate if you complain about mistreatment or try to access healthcare or take leave related to treatment of your gender dysphoria, as well as setting different terms of employment for you that are not the same as non-LGBTQ employees, such as offering different benefits, better work assignments, better pay, and so on. So these are just some examples. This is not an exhaustive list. So if you've experienced something that you think might be harassment or discrimination because of your LGBTQ status, definitely consider moving forward or talking to an attorney to see if you might have a claim, or go ahead and file a complaint. So if you're interested in filing a complaint with the New York State Division of Human Rights, check out their website. You can Google them here. And on this website, you can get resources to learn more about your rights. You can actually read the law and regulations, and you can also get information about language access to make sure that you are able to talk to people at the division and get complaint forms that are in your preferred language. So this is different from the EEOC's complaint process. With the human rights law, you have 2 options. You can file a complaint with the Division of Human Rights directly, which is the agency in New York State that enforces the law. Or you can sue in court. You don't have to file a complaint with the agency first to get to court like you do on the federal level. So you have a choice, which is important. If you decide to move forward with filing a complaint with the Division of Human Rights, you have 1 year to file a complaint from the last time something happened. Again, strong recommendation is to file something as soon as possible as opposed to waiting a year. It is pretty user friendly, it's fast, it's free, and you don't need an attorney to help you. Alternatively, if you want to file in court, you have a 3-year statute of limitations. So if it has been more than a year since you last experienced discrimination and you can't file a complaint with the Division of Human Rights, it's too late, you still might have time to file something directly with court. It gives you a longer period of time to file. It is much more complicated and expensive and lengthy process. So if you go that route, I do strongly encourage you to seek out the assistance of an attorney who can represent you or at least advise you through the process. So the complaint process is pretty similar to that with the EEOC. You file a complaint with the Division of Human Rights. You have to do it within a year of the last time something happened. So definitely keep an eye on those deadlines. Usually the division conducts an investigation within 6 months. Again, sometimes it can take a little longer. They will make what's called a probable cause finding, which, like the EEOC, means that they think it's more likely than not that something occurred. If you get a probable cause finding, most people are able to reach a settlement after that stage. However, if you're not able to reach a settlement, move on to something called a public hearing, which is your opportunity to go in front of an administrative law judge to state your case. If you don't have an attorney at that point and you get to a public hearing, the Division of Human Rights will actually assign one of its attorneys to present your case for you. I'm a big fan of this process, and I encourage you to check it out. If you decide to file a complaint on your own, definitely put together a body of evidence to support your complaint. And that can be a lot of different things. That can be notes that you take as the bad things are happening. So as soon as you have a bad interaction or a meeting with your manager or a bad encounter with a colleague or your landlord or a restaurant manager, whatever the case may be, make notes about it right away. Put a date, put a time, put all the details you can remember, the names, the who, where, what, when, and why of everything, as well as the witnesses. And if you can't bring yourself to do it, ask a friend to write the notes down for you as you relay them to them. Memory is not perfect and things will start to slip to the side. But if you have it all written down at the time that it happened, that serves as really good evidence in your case. Also, be sure to keep any text messages, emails, voicemails, social media posts, comments on social media posts, anything that might support the claim of discrimination or harassment that you're experiencing. Eyewitnesses can be extremely useful, so be sure to ask people who might have seen or heard what happened firsthand if they can support you in this process, as well as any medical records that you might have in terms of physical or emotional harm that you experience as a result of what happened. A lot of folks that I've worked with experience stress, anxiety, depression, suicidal ideation or attempts, as well as things like eating disorders, sleeping disorders, mood disorders, high cholesterol, high blood pressure. All of these things can help to show that not only did the thing happen that you said happened, but also you were clearly impacted in a negative way, which can help you reach a resolution in terms of settlement or help you get damages for the harm that you experienced. So when you're advocating for yourself, here's a really quick basic order to keep in mind. Let the wrongdoer know that there's a problem. So whether it's the school, your employer, landlord, manager, whoever, they need to know that there's a problem and give them an opportunity to fix it. If they don't fix it, that's when you can file a complaint and show that even though they knew they did a wrong thing, they didn't try to correct it and they kept doing the wrong stuff. And be sure to keep records of everything you do along the way, the attempts to let them know, their response to it or lack of response, and everything else in between. Thank you so much for joining us for this training. If you have any questions and want more information about your rights, definitely check out the New York State Division of Human Rights website for more information about your rights, what identities and statuses are protected under the New York State human rights law, access to complaint forms, resources, the law itself, if you really want to read it, as well as resources for language access if English is not your first language. Thank you so much for your time and best of luck to you exercising your rights.